Hello Zero Books readers. In this video, we'll try to figure out how something can come from nothing, or how change is possible. We'll be taking excerpts from Philip Cunliffe's Lenin Lives and Anselm Jappe's The Writing on the Wall, and we'll also consider the Philip K. Dick story The Electric Ant in our effort to help clarify what we're up against when we advocate for radical change. Before we do any of that, let's take a moment to consider the nature of the problem of radical political change in the abstract. Let's just consider change itself. Take a simple example. You have a bottle of Coca-Cola, and you pour the Coke into an empty glass. You watch the frosted mug or glass slowly fill up with the real thing. Delicious Coca-Cola slowly moves from the bottle to the glass, and you think that what's happened is simple. You've watched the process unfold gradually. You've seen liquid increments fall forth from the bottle into the glass, and you think you understand what's happened. However, what was an empty glass now contains Coca-Cola, and as obvious as it appears to be, something has happened that requires an explanation. There has been a conceptual change. What was empty is now filled. Perhaps a better example would be the freezing process, as this is an even clearer example of qualitative change. You fill up an ice cube tray with water, or as is your wont, with Coke, and you put the tray in the freezer. Let's say a camera that you've stored inside the fridge tracks the process of freezing. Gradually, the top and outer edge of the Coca-Cola or water becomes hardened and cold, freezing. This continues to happen until the entire cube of what was liquid is now solid. You think this is an obvious process of gradual change, but in fact, something has happened to the essence of the Coca-Cola. The Coke has made a qualitative and essential leap that the gradual process obscures.
With two hydrogen atoms joined on. Because the oxygen atom is slightly negatively charged and the hydrogen atoms are slightly positively charged, molecules of water will be attracted to each other.
Today we are living in a political moment where, despite massive upheaval and crisis, the essence of the world seems to be permanently frozen. While we want to create change, to leap from the world as it is to another, more liberated and equitable world, part of the problem is that we're enthralled with gradualism, and perhaps because of this, we continually operate on the wrong level as we attempt to make change. It is as if we are trying to make ice by pouring our Coca-Cola into different containers. Now, before I start to attempt to solve this problem, I want to throw in another difficulty, to add another problem. What we're attempting to change isn't the temperature of a bottle of Coca-Cola, but ourselves. We're attempting to become something new. In the Philip K. Dick short story, The Electric Ant, an android comes to know that he is not a human being, but a robot, and he attempts to free himself from his programming. He consults his computer and asks for instructions on tracking down the control mechanism inside him, and the computer instructs him to open his chest and look for a punch card reader located above his artificial heart. The computer tells the robot, "This is BBB307DR, recontacting you in response to your query. The punch tape roll above your heart mechanism is not a programming turret, but is in fact a reality supply construct." And so the protagonist in PKT's short story is able to look at what gives him reality, and he's devastated by this because he realizes that everything he thinks he sees is really an image stored on a punch card. I'd argue that this is our predicament as we attempt to break with capitalism. What we want to change is the very mechanism that not only sets up our morality and politics, but that ultimately defines our self-conception and provides for our survival. What this means is that whatever visions or imaginings we might muster, any thought of a new world will also be a product of the same punch card we call capitalism.
I'm an electric ant. I'm an electric ant. Can't they see I can change my own reality?
With this in mind, we might better understand why Marx called communism a specter that haunted capitalist society. In his book, Lenin Lives, Philip Cunliffe explains how a ghostly communism is used by the right to define its conservative mission, and how, in its spectral form, communism becomes synonymous with what are really only competing approaches to managing the capitalist world. Quote, "The political right, so long defined by its opposition to communism, remains incapable of accepting its world historic victory in the Cold War. 30 years since the collapse of the USSR, and the political right is still convulsed by red panics, hysterically proclaiming the extent of socialist infiltration and the need to reclaim their countries. Isolated tenured mandarins of critical theory and postmodernism are blamed for having single-handedly overturned Western civilization by infiltrating the academy with Gnostic teachings that they themselves only dimly comprehend. Frumpy social democrats, such as Jeremy Corbyn in Britain and Bernie Sanders in the US, shambolic left populist parties such as Syriza in Greece and Podemos in Spain, are decried as fanatical and ruthless communists in the financial pages. But wait a minute. Let's rewind. To add another problem. What we're attempting to change isn't the temperature of a bottle of Coca-Cola, but ourselves. We're attempting to become something new. In the Philip K. Dick short story, The Electric Ant, an android comes to know that he is not a human being, but a robot, and he attempts to free himself from his programming. He consults his computer and asks for instructions on tracking down the control mechanism inside him, and the computer instructs him to open his chest and look for a punch card reader located above its artificial heart. The computer tells the robot, "This is BBB307DR, recontacting you in response to your query. The punch tape roll above your heart mechanism is not a programming turret, but is in fact a reality supply construct." The difficulty for the android is that the android's perception of the reality construction unit is itself generated by the reality construction unit. Let's imagine for a moment that this punch tape reality mechanism has a flaw. Let's say that it was designed in such a way to only present a two-dimensional reality to the android. Not only would the punch roll mechanism itself be two-dimensional, but every alternative to the punch roll mechanism, say an audio tape or a floppy disk, would also appear to be two-dimensional. This is a situation we're dealing with. If we conceive of capitalism as our own programming, as our punch tape roll, then every strategy we cook up will be of the capitalist dimension. This is why Anselm Jappe writes in his book, The Writing on the Wall, "The ritual evocation of politics as the only possible way to change the world is the core concept of today's left, from the Bourdieusian sociologists to multitude, from ATTAC to the radical electoral left. Despite their explicit intention to create a completely different politics, they still lapse into capitalist realism." However, there is an alternative to audio tapes and floppy disks. There is an alternative to this or that political solution within the realm of capitalism. Again, quoting Jappe, "Faced with this desire to play the game, movements and moments of radical opposition that embraced anti-politics should be recalled. From the historical anarchists to the artistic avant-gardes, from certain movements in the global south to the wildcat strike of May 68 in France, and the continuous state of insubordination in Italian factories during the 1970s. This anti-politics is just as far removed from the refusal of conscious intervention as anti-art, which was not a rejection of artistic means, but on the contrary, was conceived as the only way to remain faithful to the original intention of art. The solution Jappe is pointing to isn't passive. It isn't a turn to quietism, although it might appear passive in its earliest development. The aim of a revolutionary movement should be to map out the third dimension in two-dimensional terms. The aim of a revolutionary movement should be to construct socialism in the abstract, to understand socialism conceptually. The work before us isn't to orchestrate a coup, it isn't to figure out which set of representatives can step forward and fill the world out, make the world work. Rather, it's to devise a plan, and then to take a risk.
You asked what real change might look like, and I think that is a really interesting question for liberals and radicals, because there is a hunger for change out there among millions of people who feel sort of insecure, uncertain about the future, and do want that to change. I think that change only comes through a big imaginative idea, a sort of picture of another kind of future which connects with that fearfulness in the back of people's minds and offers them a release from it. That's the key thing. But I think the question for liberals and radicals is that they are always suspicious of big ideas. That's what lurks underneath the liberal mind.